Good morning from Warramai Country. I'm Claire Murphy. Welcome to the Solo Bureau. Men behaving badly. That's been the theme of the past week and a half of the news cycle. I've had several women reach out to me this week. Some I've interviewed in the past when their paths have crossed with men from various sporting teams on a night out. Some that have ended incredibly traumatically for those women. They reminded me again of the long-term impacts of a culture that allows men to behave badly when they're covered by their teammates. From the top of the sport right down to country towns where young girls have been ostracised from their community for daring to speak out against sexual violence from local players. Some of those women are just plain outraged at the response from the Sydney Swans leadership, who claim sadness and other emotions, but not, it seems, responsibility for the culture that led their players to think drinking to excess and then inviting women back to their hotel room while in Melbourne for work was acceptable. What is happening when men decide to seemingly throw away the respect and reputation they fought hard to earn both on and off the field, professionally and personally? We'll speak to experts in this field to see if we can get some answers. But before we do that, here's what's been happening while you were sleeping. It's Wednesday, August 26. The South Australian Government has confirmed a second long-nosed fur seal has died of the H5N1 bird flu in Pages Conservation Park. The park is on an island off of Kangaroo Island, a key breeding site for the endangered Australian sea lion, which authorities are now concerned may lead to an extinction event with only 12,000 of the animals in the current population. 309 positive bird flu cases have now been recorded across the country as the vaccination program's being extended outside of the little penguin colony on Phillip Island in Victoria. 30 species of native birds at Cleland Wildlife Park south of Adelaide have also been approved for the program. A service has been held to remember Detective Leading Senior Constable Neil Thompson and Senior Constable Vadim Devort Hotta, who were gunned down by Desi Freeman a year ago today. Hundreds gathered outside Wangaratta Police Station to remember the officers who were killed while executing a warrant for Freeman's arrest at Porepunkah in Victoria's Alpine region on August 26, 2025. Freeman was shot dead by police 7 months later. A memorial was unveiled in their honour at the station by Victorian Police Chief Commissioner Mike Bush. Celebrity agent Ralph Carr has been handed a 6-year jail term with 4 years non-parole for the rape of a former employee. Carr, who used to manage the careers of the likes of former AFL star Dustin Martin and ex-wife Tina Arena, cried as he learnt of his jail term. He still maintains his innocence despite a Victorian County Court jury convicting him on 2 counts of rape and 1 of sexual assault. The 66-year-old attempted to have his sentence stayed while he appealed, claiming he'd suffered a miscarriage of justice, but the judge rejected the application, telling Carr that rape is a crime of violence and that this was committed by you in an egregious breach of trust. The former girlfriend of convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, has failed in her bid to have her US conviction overturned. The 64-year-old was sentenced to 20 years behind bars for trafficking young women into Epstein's orbit, but had claimed her constitutional rights at trial and sentencing had been violated. The judge presiding over the case called the claims meritless and frivolous. The US Supreme Court last year also declined to hear an appeal by Maxwell of her sex trafficking conviction. A judge has ruled that eHarmony's basic free membership deceived its customers. The website that promises to help its users find love had a try before you buy promotion that said there was no pressure to sign up and that users could sign up for free and review matches. Those who paid for a 1-month premium membership were then charged for a 6-month subscription, had to pay hidden and additional fees, and were then not able to cancel the subscription that automatically renewed even after they'd deleted their profile. Meanwhile, while they were on the free basic membership, they were unable to actually speak to anyone they'd matched with. Penalties and any payments to affected customers will be decided by the court at a later date. US President Donald Trump has threatened to change the name of Lake Ontario amid their escalating trade war with Canada. Writing on social media, Trump said the US is giving serious consideration to changing the name of Lake Ontario to Lake America, in that we don't expect to be doing much business with Ontario any longer. The disagreement started when the US announced they were bringing in 50% tariffs on Canadian goods. Trump writing on social media overnight that over the last 10 years, the United States lost, on average, $60 billion a year with Canada Canada no more. Canada responded after talks between the two countries broke down, saying they would match those tariffs dollar for dollar. Trump told Canadian leaders on Monday to fall in line or face consequences far worse than existing tariffs. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has accused Washington of trying to subordinate them. Canada and the United States share one of the world's largest trading relationships, with integrated supply chains across the automotive industry, energy, agriculture and manufacturing. A prolonged trade fight will be costly for business and workers on both sides of the border. Adelaide Crows captain Jordan Dawson has won several awards overnight, but his focus was on sending a message to those struggling with mental health. The 29-year-old, who was named vice-captain of the All-Australian team, also won the AFL Players Association Best Captain and Most Courageous Player awards, rewarded for leading the Crows to sixth on the ladder despite the difficult circumstances following the death of his elder brother Jared in April. He described the support network that has kept him afloat during the hard times, explaining that he continues to check in with them and sending this message to anyone out there dealing with their own struggles.
I just want to wish anyone who's struggled with mental health out there, or who is struggling with mental health, to know that you are definitely loved and the world is a better place with you in it.
Those are your top stories today, folks. Up next, to understand where we find ourselves with the Sydney Swans' fallout this past week, we're heading back in time to see what lessons we should have learned from when good nights go bad. Back in 2004, both the AFL and the NRL were rocked by sexual assault allegations. Two women met St Kilda players Stephen Milne and Lee Montagna after the club's family day, where both players had been drinking heavily. They went back to Montagna's home, where one of the women, who was 19 at the time, accused Milne of sexual assault. Milne denied the allegations and no charges were laid. But nearly 10 years later, the Office of Police Integrity reviewed the case and found an inadequate investigation had been conducted. They charged Stephen Milne with 4 counts of rape and fined him $15,000. No conviction was recorded after he pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of indecent assault. That same year, a group of Canterbury Bulldogs rugby league players allegedly sexually assaulted a 20-year-old woman in a Coffs Harbour resort pool. No charges were laid and the players denied it happened, but club officials acknowledged at the time that wild behaviour and group sexual activity had taken place during the pre-season trip. Several players were disciplined for their behaviour, and the club brought in strict player codes of conduct guidelines that didn't allow them to bring women back to the accommodation. Then the league also turned the spotlight on itself and started to take a serious look at their culture. Catherine Lumby, a professor of media in the Media and Communications Department at the University of Sydney, was one of the people they reached out to.
David Gallup, who was the then CEO of the NRL, contacted me to ask advice on what to do or how to respond, because part of my expertise is in gender and consent and power. He was not interested in PRing his way out of it. He wanted to put something in place in the game to make a change. And I said to him, well, you need to do research to find out what is happening off the field before you respond. So they commissioned the university I worked at, Sydney University, for me to lead a team of researchers where we surveyed all the players and we did lots of interviews with them. And on the basis of that research, we designed education programs. And over the next 15 years, the NRL paid for the research to be conducted every 5 years to evaluate the programs and to evaluate attitudes and behaviours. So it was really an absolute best practice approach that they committed to.
What she found in doing that research was men seeking acceptance from within their club under immense pressure and leaning on their senior players, who they wouldn't dare question.
They are young men put under huge pressure when it comes to performance on the field. And off the field, there's been a long-standing culture in Australian male sport of cutting loose after a big win, blowing off steam, if you like, and that some of those behaviours have been really harmful to women. So what we worked on were real-world scenarios, and the education wasn't delivered by me giving them a lecture. That wouldn't work. We had ex-players teamed with young trained educators to get the guys to look at real-world scenarios they confronted, because they have a huge amount of, sudden fame, money, celebrity. People want to party with them, but they need support to make the right decisions.
She said there was a marked improvement in how the men of the NRL treated women after they'd spent time within this newly created education system.
Yeah, the research showed a measurable change in the right direction when it came to attitudes and behaviours. And my position on this has always been that we're talking about young men who were brought into an elite football league from a variety of different backgrounds. They deserve support.
Back then, the AFL chose to go in a different direction. They instead launched a campaign to respond to the negative press, positioning their organisation as socially responsible and prepared to stand up against all forms of violence against women. The Respect and Responsibility program was created, a series of online modules which players are obliged to complete annually, and they do have some expertise and guidance from community groups. Both codes have since faced more accusations of sexual assault. Now in 2026, a group of 5 Swans players have been sanctioned for drinking heavily and bringing women back to their accommodation. They've been ruled out for the rest of the season. Football media reporting on what a shame it is they've jeopardised the club's finals chances. In 2014, former Sydney Swans player Luke Ablett wrote an article for The Guardian discussing Swans culture. He looked at what had made the club a success despite being firmly in NRL territory, the first and then only Sydney-based AFL team until Greater Western Sydney arrived on the scene. Ablett spoke of his time at the club where they overhauled their culture, writing, "We always tried to refine what the Bloods actually meant, and ultimately how we wanted to judge ourselves. That is probably the most important element of successful football club culture, not just the statistical measurements, but the character traits that you aspire to. That might be training standards, recovery standards, or what you go and do on a Saturday night. You establish those values and desired characteristics and decide how you want to see yourself as a group." He continued saying if you did something wrong, whether it be in a game, on the training track, or on Saturday night, you had to look your teammates in the eyes the next day and answer to them. Then he says, if you can't recognise problems, it's hard to change them. So are football teams still struggling to recognise the problems? Associate Professor Kirsty Fosdyke is the Associate Dean, Research and Industry Engagement in the Rural Health School at La Trobe University. Welcome to the Solo Bureau, Kirsty.
Thanks for having me.
I wanted to get your take on how you feel the AFL as a league and the Swans as a club have responded to the allegations levelled against its players. We've seen people front press conferences and seem very upset and very sad, but what I have felt has been lacking in the conversation, I'm interested to know if you feel the same way, is a lack of taking responsibility for a culture that has allowed this to occur. Would you feel that way too?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been an issue we've had for, I would say, a number of years, but then actually when I think about it, a number of decades. The AFL has never really taken full responsibility for the culture that it has across the sport, whether that be at the elite level or right down to community clubs. And I think for years, we've recognised that the AFL places greater importance on its brand as a business, more so than it does for the safety of its members, its players, but also broader society, as we see continually the connection between violence and abuse within the sport and outside of the sport connected to players and other people as well. So yes, definitely, I do not believe the AFL actually responds to this appropriately. I guess one thing we could say is that the way they've responded this time, in that there has actually been a response, is probably different to what it would have been 5-10 years ago. There may be a small step of progress, but you can still see with the way that experts have reacted to how they've dealt with it, they've still got such a long way to go. And that's also across the media as well. I do wonder whether the way we put football in this country up on a pedestal does cause some of that harm in and of itself. It's an incredible reluctance to acknowledge the harms that actually go on within the sport itself and by the people who play in that sport.
Well, let's look at you mentioned the media response to this too, which has been really interesting. I saw Marnie Vinall from the ABC talk about this, that at this moment it showed the real lack of diversity in sports media at this time, because a lot of the conversation, and I know that you can't talk about sexual assault allegations because they are allegations. Everyone has the right to innocence before being proven guilty, and you cannot be a part of that conversation, have an opinion on it at this point. But instead of discussing the impacts on women, or more specifically, especially in the aftermath, the impact on AFLW players who share facilities with the men who play the sport. But it seemed to focus on, oh no, these players have ruined the Swans' finals chances, and why won't we think of all the other players who are now being forced to suffer because of these 5? How do you feel the media responds to allegations like this?
Yeah, I mean, it says it all, really, doesn't it? The focus, as I've mentioned before, is very much on the brand, and football in the media response has been placed first and foremost over and above the impacts, like you say, not only of women that may have been involved in what's been alleged in the first place, to women actually within the club itself, women who play the sport more broadly, either the elite level or right down to the community club level, and women in society more broadly, the fans that watch, the women at home or participating in other sports. This focus on what it meant for the finals, what it meant for the other male team players, it's really disheartening. And it's really disappointing that we should still be having this conversation, that women haven't actually been prioritised.
I don't know if you've seen this, but another thing that's happened this week is the Richmond players who are on their Mad Monday celebrations seemingly mocked what allegedly occurred in that Melbourne hotel room with these women. I wonder what you feel about that. A lot of women around me have opinions about this, but I'd love to know what you think about that.
Yeah, I don't know the exact what happened or what they're saying or what they were putting out from the Richmond players. But I think what it talks to is a complete lack of understanding, a lot of ignorance across the board, a lot of myths and misconceptions, and a lot of disrespect for women and what they do and who they are. And I think that's incredibly sad and disappointing. I think there was something was mentioned to me last week, and it was an interview with the ABC, is that these people have received more education and training, and there's all sorts of respect programs that so many of these clubs purport to put out. And yet we're still seeing this, and we're still seeing this behavior and these attitudes and these responses. Clearly something isn't working. And I think there's almost at the highest levels an absolute acceptance or tolerance of this behavior that necessarily filters down, that no matter how much education that you put some of these young players in front of, it's not going to filter through unless the people higher up, unless the institution itself actually holds itself accountable. Until we see that, I don't think change is actually going to occur.
Do we need to look at the types of training that the players are actually getting? Because I know there seems to be quite a difference, or there used to be at least. I don't know what they've done currently, in what type of training they get. So instead of, say, in the NRL, when they used to actually speak to players and get an understanding of how they felt about women and what help they needed and the kind of programs that might be suitable for them to better understand things like consent, whereas the AFL has focused on what I believe is an online module that they complete once a year, and then a lot of it is wrapped up in what their contractual obligations are and what the expectations are of them as representatives of the club rather than as a man in this world. Do you think we have to look at the type of training that we are extending to these players, because it doesn't seem to be doing them a service at this point?
No, and you do sort of question whether what they're actually putting out, who's developed that, what expertise has actually fed into that, has that been with, and we've got a lot of expertise, we've got a lot of specialist services that could actually develop that kind of training with evidence base. We are not short of evidence base of what works and what doesn't. So I think a review of those training programs would be incredibly important. to understand why that clearly isn't working. But the other thing is, we can put out training programs. It can be a tick box exercise, but what are they really trying to achieve with it? Because at the same time, they're still putting players that have been charged, convicted, done prison time for domestic violence, for sexual assault, and they're still giving those men platforms. So what does that say to the young men coming through? What does that say to women in Australian society if we're still giving men such as them the platform to speak out? It just suggests that we feel that their ability to play footy and is far more important than the well-being of women in this country.
Kirsty, this story has broken at the same time as some other things within Australian society right now, and it does seem like a lot at once. So, for example, there are allegations against 2 groups of private schoolboys who have allegedly sexually assaulted young girls. There's also research out from, I think it's the University of Melbourne, that looked at the attitudes of young men here in Australia and found that a lot of them are anti-feminist. They think feminism has gone too far, that they feel like violence towards women is at some point acceptable, and that can lead to violent extremism. It feels like we are at a bit of a crossroads right now where things could get worse. Are you feeling that?
Yeah, I am, and I'm part of a research group that is working incredibly hard across this space, the Reducing Gender-Based Violence Research Group at La Trobe University. And one of the biggest projects we have at the moment is the Partners in Prevention. That is actually looking at the evidence base for sexual violence prevention initiatives, which does include things like consent education. The reason why I think it feels as though it's getting worse and nothing's happening is we haven't had the investment in this space from our government for decades. There has not been the appropriate investment in the research, in the initiative development, ensuring all our services are appropriately resourced. So when you don't see that kind of investment from a government and the priority, then again, you sort of think, well, maybe it's not as important as, I don't know, putting money into other areas that the government is putting money into. And I think that does us such a disservice. It feels that we're now scrambling, we're behind. Most services have been doing things on the smell of an oily rag, and that needs to change. It needs to change in each of the states. The states need to invest appropriately in it, and the federal government needs to invest appropriately in it, because otherwise, as you say, things are just going to get worse unless we can actually really tackle this issue appropriately. It is an epidemic of violence.
Catherine Lumby does not condone the behaviour we've been discussing today, but says the men who witness these things and don't speak up, they're dealing with their own demons too.
There are a lot of good men who feel scared to stand up, because particularly if there's a star player involved leading the so-called team bonding behaviour, some of those men don't feel they can speak out. And some of them, I mean, certainly in our research, we found some of them were very distressed and they had a lot on their conscience. So one of the things we need to do, and we need to start young in schools, is teaching active consent, but also giving permission for people to be ethical bystanders, to understand how to intervene when a good night is going bad.
Just need to add in here that overnight the Richmond Football Club has released a statement in relation to their players on Mad Monday, saying the club has spoken to the players who have expressed their embarrassment over their behaviour. The players are adamant they were in no way referencing or making light of recent matters. Be kind to yourself today, friends. Thank you for hanging out with the Solo Bureau. For those of you who've experienced sexual assault or abuse and need to speak to someone about it, the number to call is 1-800-RESPECT. I'll pop a link to it in the show notes too. Okay, on a brighter note to end, I need your help. I've just had new professional photos taken for the show, and I want your opinion on which one you like better. There's one of me in blue, which is a bit less serious, and one in green, which is a bit more serious. Both pics are up on the Solo Bureau Instagram right now. Let me know in the comments which headshot should be the one I use for all the promo stuff. I think at this point green is winning, although I personally am partial to the blue. And that's why I need you. I need a tiebreaker. Okay, that's it. We're done for today. Get out of here. Go do your thing. I'll catch you tomorrow.